Welcome to 30 Days of Photoshop. We're on day 3, layers and masks. Hey there, welcome to Phlearn. My name is Aaron Nace. You can find me on Phlearn.com where we make learning fun. Welcome to day 3 of our 30-day Photoshop series. Today, we are discussing layers and masks. So to start off with, layers are one of the foundations of Photoshop. And I like to think about layers as pieces of paper. So you got a stack of pieces of paper, you got a piece of paper, you can kind of just keep stacking and stacking and stacking as you want. Now, sometimes this piece of paper is going to be completely covered by this piece of paper, so you won't even be able to see what's underneath. But sometimes you can have layers with transparency. So maybe it'll cover just half of it, so you'll be able to see half of what's underneath and cover up half of it. So for instance, we have a picture of some citrus fruit. So we've got citrus fruit, and we're going to put some text over top of it. It's not going to cover up the whole image, just a little bit of the citrus. And then if I wanted, I could put something over top that again. So layers allow you to create these stacks within your image that when you view, it all just looks like one solid image, but you can change the layer order, you can turn them off, you can change opacity, and change how those layers blend with one another. We're also going to show you how to use layer masks, which will allow you to hide or show any part of your layer. The best thing about using layer masks is you can change them at any point in time. So if you make a mistake, you can simply undo it no matter what stage of the process you're at. Layer masks are the perfect way to cut objects out of their background, and they're completely non-destructive. We got a great episode for you. Let's jump into Photoshop. So we're going to start off by opening up our sample image, layers and masks. You can actually download this on Phlearn.com and follow along. Just click on the link right down below. So let's go ahead and click on open, and we're going to hit F for full screen. So if you don't see your layers tab, mine is right over here. Simply go to window and down to layers. Make sure it has a checkbox next to it. Now we're going to take a look at our base layer. It's always going to be called your background, and right now it has a little lock next to it. That lock basically doesn't allow us to move the position of our background layer. For instance, if I grab my move tool and try to move it, it's going to say, hey, you can't move this. It needs to be where it is. But you could always convert this to a normal layer if you wanted to. So let's go ahead and say convert to normal layer, and then check this out. I can move this around, and then I'm just going to have transparent area back here. Most of the time you don't need to move your background layer around, so I'm going to hit Control or Command Z and go ahead and put it back where it is. Okay, now let's go ahead and create a new layer on top of our background. We're going to click on this little plus icon, and that's going to create our first new layer. So as of now, there's nothing on this layer. If I use my move tool and move it around, you're going to see there's nothing at all that happens. So let's go ahead and start by doing something on our new layer. We're going to grab our brush tool. So let's hit B for the brush tool, and we're going to choose a color here. So we're going to click on this little square here for our foreground color. And I want to choose a nice bright green. We're going to go a little bit more towards yellow. I want to make one of these lemons look like it's a lime. There we go. So with our brush tool, that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and zoom right in. There we go. And paint with our brush tool right over top of this lemon. There we go. Now for this example, I'm not necessarily trying to make this 100% perfect. There we go. You can always zoom in and take your time with it and make sure that it follows the lemon or lime perfectly. But in this case, we're going to go, there we go. Pretty good, but I'm not trying to make it 100% perfect. Okay. So what I've done is just painted that area on a new layer. Now I can still use my move tool. Let's go ahead and click on our move tool and click and drag and move this anywhere I wanted. So if I wanted it over here, no problem. Let's hit Control or Command Z and we're going to move it back. I can turn this layer off and on at any time, and I can do things like change my opacity. So right up here we have opacity. If I click and drag this down, you're going to be able to start to see through this green a little bit to whatever's underneath. Now, right now I realize we just have like a green blob, but you could do this with anything. It could be a complete different photograph that you could put over top of this and change the opacity as well. We also have what's known as blending modes, which will allow this green to blend in differently with the underlying images. So let's go ahead and take a look at those. Now, right here where it says normal, we're going to click there and you can see we have a lot of different blending modes. You don't really have to memorize all of these. They're kind of broken out into groups, and all of the commonly used ones are at the top of each group. So here we have normal and dissolve. Okay, then we have darken, multiply. So this is our darken group. So the commonly used blending modes here are darken and multiply. And then color burn, linear burn, and darker color. We don't use those very often. They have some applications, but most of the time you'd be on darken or multiply. Next, you have your lighten group. So you have lighten or screen, and then color dodge, linear dodge, and lighter color. So within this group, lighten and screen are the most common you'll use. Next, we have our overlay group, and overlay and soft light are the most commonly used here. And then we have hard light, vivid light, linear, pin light, and hard mix. And you can see as I scroll through this, it changes from looking just like a solid green color, very, very different effects with my image. Next, we have our difference group. This is a little bit more like special effects. Usually we don't use these that often. And then here at the bottom, we have our color group. So we have our hue, our saturation, and our color, as well as luminosity. So in this case, we're going to choose hue. There we go. Let's go ahead and click on that. And it's going to change the hue of that lemon to a green color, making it look more like a lime, which is really cool. So basically what we did is created a new layer and then just used our brush tool to paint green on that layer and change the layer blend mode to hue, and now it looks green. Pretty cool. Now I can change the hue of this layer at any time. I painted green to start with, but I can always change this. I'm going to go to Image, to Adjustments, and over to Hue/Saturation, and that's going to allow me to change the hue, saturation, and lightness of this layer. So for instance, I'm going to grab my hue, and I can see that as I change my hue slider, it's going to really make a difference in what hue we have for this lime. Okay? And we're going to go back down to right about there because that just looks a little bit more realistic as a green. And of course, I can change my saturation going up or down. That looks pretty good, actually. So let's hit OK there. So very easily, I don't have to do much work here. I was able to change what looks like a lemon into something that looks like a lime. So again, keep in mind, because this green is above our background layer, it's going to affect everything beneath it. So your layer order really matters. For instance, if I grab my move tool and I move this over top of these pomegranate seeds, you can see they become green because this green is right above. Okay, and of course I can turn this off and on at any point in time. So now let's say I want to make a copy of something that's on my background layer. For instance, this orange here. So what we're going to use is our clone stamp tool that's going to allow us to sample that orange and simply copy it to a new place. So let's go ahead and create another new layer. Okay, you can hit Shift Option Command N for a new layer. Okay, or you can just click on this plus to create a new layer. So as for the clone stamp tool, we want to make sure it says sample current and below. So it's going to sample the current layer and everything below it. Okay. And we're going to go ahead and hold Alt or Option, and that's going to sample our background layer. So hold Alt or Option and click. So you'll see a little target area. So Alt or Option and click. And then I'm going to move my cursor right over here, and we can see a little preview of what I'm going to paint. And as I just click and start painting around, you're going to see it's basically creating a copy of that citrus right over here where I paint, which is really, really cool. And this is on a new layer. So you can see I'm not doing a perfect job here. I accidentally copied a pomegranate there, pomegranate seed. And now let's say I want to erase part of this orange. Well, instead of just grabbing our eraser tool, which is a destructive way of doing it, what I want to use is a layer mask, and that'll allow me to undo something if I make a mistake. So let's go ahead and show you how layer masks work. Simply click right down here on your layer mask icon. It looks like a white rectangle with a dark circle punched out of it. So let's go ahead and click there. Now you can see when I did this, we have our layer, and then it created this white area right next to it. This is our layer mask. So if your layer mask is completely white, then that means your layer is going to be completely visible. If it's black, your layer is going to be completely invisible. So let's go ahead and grab a brush tool. B for the brush tool, and I want to paint with black. So I'm going to go right over here and start painting with black on my layer mask right over top of this orange. Okay, Now you're thinking, no, you're erasing the orange, all your hard work. Well, you're right, but because we're using a layer mask instead of an eraser tool, I can get it back. So I just painted with black, which makes things invisible. Now, if I switch my colors here and I paint with white, look at this. I can just make it back visible again. Forever and ever. There's no time limit on this. I can save this, and 100 years from now, I can come back and change this layer mask. So let's go ahead and say I want to hide this little bit of pomegranate here, right? So what we're going to do is I'm going to paint black on my layer mask. So let's click on the layer mask. We'll paint black just right here. There we go. I need to paint black a little bit right there. On the top a little bit. There we are. And right down here. Just a little bit there as well. And that hides everything that we don't want to be visible. Incredibly simple. Now, I can disable this layer mask temporarily by holding Shift and clicking on the layer mask, and you can see I get it all back. Shift, click on the layer mask, and it's gone again. So at this point, I can click on my layer and still use my Move tool if I'd like, and start to move this around. So you can see, because this is a layer on top of everything, I can still turn this off and on if I want to. I can even do things like make this a little bit smaller and warp this, because right now it's pretty obvious that it just looks exactly like this. So what we're going to do is hit Control or Command T for transform, and I'm going to go ahead and shrink this down just a little bit. There we go. And I'm going to click on my little warp dialog right up here, and that is going to allow me to kind of like push and pull at each one of these segments here, okay, to kind of change the shape of it. So it doesn't necessarily look like exactly a copy of that over there. So let's click on that little checkbox up there. Now, it's a little bit light right here on the edge. So on my layer mask, there we go. I'm just going to paint black on my layer mask right over here. And that's going to allow me to just fade that area away and get something that looks realistic. Okay, and now I can just move this wherever I want, part of my composition, and that looks great. So I was able to duplicate that from my background layer to a new layer. We added a layer mask to hide what we didn't want, and we even transformed it to make it smaller and warped it to change the shape. Now again, I can turn this off and on at any time along with this layer and get back to my original. So we've created 2 layers here. There's no limit at all to how many layers you can create. I could have thousands and thousands of layers if I wanted to. There's absolutely no limit. So up until now, we've gone over standard layers as well as layer masks. Now, there are a lot of different types of layers in Photoshop. You have standard layers, which are what we just used. You also have adjustment layers, which are a little bit more special property that'll adjust your entire image. And you have things like type layers. So let's go ahead and show you those briefly. And we've got more episodes coming up that are going to go more in depth. So we're going to start with our adjustment layers. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and click on our background layer. Okay, when you're clicked on your background layer, if you make a new layer, it'll go right above your background. For instance, click on a new regular layer, it goes right above your background. You can always click and drag to move your layer order around if you'd like. Let's go ahead and click that to the trash icon to delete it. So we're going to add an adjustment layer. We'll go to Layer, down to New Adjustment Layer, and I'm going to go over to where it says Black and White. So let's click on Black and White and hit OK. Now what this is going to do is it's going to make my image black and white, obviously, right? But as you can see, it makes most of my image black and white, but it doesn't make this orange black and white. Now, why is that? The black and white adjustment layer is actually underneath the orange, so it's only going to affect things under it. So we can see turning this off and on, I can always make my image color if I'd like to, okay? But my orange is right up here. So let's go ahead and call this a color. Let's go ahead and call it orange. We'll call this lime, okay? Now I can take my black and white and put it above that, and it would affect everything below it. And I can take my black and white and put it above that, and there we go. It affects everything below that as well. So the order of your layers really matters quite a bit, because each time I move this black and white adjustment layer, for instance, it starts to affect everything underneath it. Now, I can always change the opacity of this as well, okay? So I could have a very desaturated image, okay? Let's bring it back up to 100%. And just like we had a regular layer has a layer mask, all of our adjustment layers have layer masks as well. So for instance, if I paint black on the layer mask to my adjustment layer, I could like basically just show a couple of different areas. Like if I wanted just this orange to be visible in color, I could just paint black on the layer mask here and it would show through. So black makes any layer invisible. White will make it visible on the layer mask, no matter what type of layer you're using. Now, in this case, I actually like the color of this image. So we're gonna go ahead and turn the black and white layer off, just with this little eyeball. Now, if I decide later I want it back on, all I have to do is click on this eye and it's back on again. So I really haven't lost anything by turning it off temporarily. So we've seen layers, layer masks, adjustment layers, and their masks. Let's go ahead and show you how type works in Photoshop as well. So to start off, let's go to our type tool. So you can hit T on your keyboard for type, or go ahead and click here on your type tool. Now I'm gonna click right here on our image, okay? And we're gonna type in citrus. There we go, and hit Control or Command Enter to apply that. Now, as of now, it's not really working because it's completely off the board. So what we're gonna do is open up our character menu because I need to make some adjustments. So I can do this with my character menu, or if you're using the latest version of Photoshop, CC 2020, you can go to your property menu. So property will actually contain a lot of information about type as well, okay? And you can get to that if you don't see it, simply by going to Window and down to Properties. So here I'm gonna change my color. Let's go ahead and just change this to white. There we go. Now I wanna change the size. It's a little bit too large, right? So we're just gonna click and drag the size a little bit further down. And I'm gonna use my move tool to kind of move it around our image just a little bit. There we go. Let's make this a little bit smaller. Now you can change the font face if you'd like. You have all these different options of what you'd like your font face to be. Okay, I'm gonna go with Lato, and we have font weight. I could go anything from, a very, very thin font weight all the way to something that's very thick, like a Lato black. Okay, now I think this actually looks pretty cool right there. Maybe we'll make this just a tiny bit bigger. My goal here is to hide some of this text behind our citrus. Let's go ahead and put it right about there. There we go. That looks pretty good with the entire image. So we'll just say this is like Citrus Magazine. My favorite. So now what we want to do is add a layer mask to this type layer. So again, we'll just click on our layer mask icon. Looks like a gray rectangle with a dark circle in it. So let's go ahead and click there, and we've added a layer mask. So again, just like with our other layer masks, if it's white, it's visible everywhere. So we want to make sure that some areas are black. So let's go ahead and zoom in. We're going to hit B for the brush tool and go ahead and start painting black. So on our layer mask, just with your black brush, simply start painting over the citrus area. There we go. Over where you don't want it to be visible. Okay? And if you make a mistake, like if you just paint over too much, that's not a big deal. Just change from black to white, because remember, white will be visible and black will be invisible. So it's a very simple change. Like here, I can't even see what I'm doing a little bit, so I'm going to overpaint. There we go. And then coming back through there, I've got a really nice selection right around there. All right. And we have the option, if we want to try to have this invisible where these pomegranate seeds are, we can do that as well. There we go. All right. And let's do this one more. So I'm simply just painting black on my layer mask, and it's hiding this layer, this type layer. Fantastic. And if I paint white, it makes it visible. All right. So we have our citrus type looking good. Now on a layer right above it, what we're going to do is use our brush tool. So let's hit B for the brush tool. I'm going to hold Alt or Option to sample one of these colors in my background. So hold Alt or Option and click, and that's going to basically select this gray color. Okay, I could select a green color if I wanted to, this yellow color, and you can see how my foreground color changes every time I click. But for now, we're just going to choose this color here. Okay, now we want to choose a soft edge brush. So we're going to right click, okay, and I'm going to choose my hardness all the way down to 0, And we're going to go ahead and bring our size up a little bit. Okay, so that's one way to choose the hardness of your brush as well as the size. Another way to do this, in my preferred way, is to hold Control and Option and click and drag from the right to the left to make your brush larger or smaller, or up and down to make your brush harder or softer. And the PC shortcuts are on your screen as well. So now what we have is this gray color, and I just want to paint with it right over here, okay, to make the shadow on the sea. But it's got one problem, just one little problem now, and that is that it's just showing on top of everything. It's showing on top of the sea, and it's showing on top of my fruit. So what we need to do now is add what's called a clipping mask. And this is the last thing we're going over here in our layers. So anytime you want a layer like this, we'll just double click and call this shadow. There we go. If I want my shadow to only be visible where my citrus is visible, then we create a clipping mask. So to do this, very easy, just right click and we go to create clipping mask. There we go. And check that out. Now this shadow is only visible just where, look at that, that's so cool. It's only visible just where the type is visible. Okay, I'm gonna change the layer blend mode from normal down to multiply. There we go. Okay, and now what we're gonna do is add a layer mask to this as well. And I'm gonna layer mask it out right here a little bit because it wasn't looking that real. And there we go. So let's just turn this shadow off and on. And you can see I was able to add this shadow to the layer mask very, very easily. There we go. And it's only visible where the citrus is visible. So we've used a combination of our layers, our adjustment layers, our type layers, our layer masks, and our clipping masks to make this effect happen. So let's go ahead and turn it off. We'll start from the beginning again and kind of show you what we've done here, because kind of a lot. So let's just go ahead and zoom out here and turn everything off. Remember, we always edit non-destructively in Photoshop, so I was able to get back to my original very easily. So we have our lime, we have our second orange, this black and white, which we could turn off and on, and then we have our citrus, okay? Now, if I want the citrus to be above everything, all I have to do is temporarily disable this layer mask. So let's hold Shift and click on this layer mask, and then there we go. The layer mask is disabled, showing everything. But we'll hold Shift and bring it back. It looks like it's behind that stuff because we just hid it. We just painted black on the layer mask. Now, here for our final, I'm gonna go ahead and turn the lime off, and I think this looks great. So now it's time for a little cleanup and organization. So here's what we're gonna do. We have our text, our citrus text, and our shadow. I'm gonna go ahead and group those together because I want them to act as one. So let's hold Control or Command and click on the two of those. And then you can either click on your group icon right down here or hit Control or Command G. Okay, we're just gonna go double click and call that text. I'm also gonna right click on this eyeball and I'm gonna give it a color. We're gonna go ahead and color it red. There we go. I'm gonna group the orange with itself. There we go. I'm gonna right click on the eyeball here and make that orange. Okay, and then we have these two layers that I wound up not using, so I'm gonna group those together. All right. We're gonna call that unused. You could also just delete them, but I'm just gonna call them unused. And here we have very well organized file. So our text, there we go. Very easy to see what's inside of our text group, which we can turn off and on. Our orange group, which we can turn off and on there. And our unused group, which we can turn off and on, but the layers inside of it are off there. So I'll just turn off the entire group and we're good to go. So what started out as just a mass of layers, adjustment layers, type layers, and clipping masks now is very well organized and very easy to see exactly what we've done. So here at the very end, it's important to go ahead and save this as a PSD, which is a layered file, so we can get back to these layers at any time. That way, if we decide later down the line, actually I don't even need the type in there, all you have to do would be turn it back off again. So let's hit Shift Command S for Save As. we're gonna go to our PSD folder, make sure our format says Photoshop, hit save, and we're good to go. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to join 30 Days of Photoshop. It's absolutely free. You can go ahead and sign up by clicking on the link right down below. You'll get a calendar of all of our tutorials, all of the sample images so you can download and follow along. You'll get daily email reminders and exclusive bonuses for this series. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks again. I'll see you in the next video. See you tomorrow. Learn you later. Bye, everyone.